by not scrapping the stage 3 tax cuts, how are you going to fund your other policies now? Because that was going to be a big part of it.
So that's the challenge, but I touched on multinational tax avoidance, as Anthony and Jim did yesterday. Yeah. I've written a paper on this. We're talking about billions of dollars that are not being not going to the budget bottom line because these companies get away with paying no tax. I mean, I can reel off this about 80 companies that paid zero tax in Australia last year, even though they had very high revenues in this country. Some companies making $1 billion in Australia paying zero tax. I mean, it's just unacceptable. The US and the OECD are moving on this. France already moved earlier with the digital services tax. So if you're a big tech company and you make $500 million in Australia, often they were paying zero tax because their headquarters was overseas. Well, President Macron said, no, you're paying your 3% on that. There's also a global minimum tax that is being pushed and supported by OECD countries globally to be a part of the global tax mix. These are really important steps. Australia should be up front on this, and Labor's going to be taking a push on this as well to make them pay their fair share.
Okay, well, class warfare became a big part of the last election with Bill Shorten vowing to take on the big end of town. So now that that's out this time around, are you taking on the bigger big end of town?
Well, it's not real. I'm going to say, like, if you're on 120 grand or 150 grand, I mean, that's sort of middle income Australia almost today. And if you've got 4 kids or 2 kids, or, you know what people, most Australians are in that median income band. I don't buy this class warfare kind of business, but I do strongly support efforts to make multinational companies pay their fair share. Why should a small business owner or an average punter, wage earner who are paying their 30 cents in the dollar, they can't offshore their tax base to Singapore or the Cayman Islands and avoid paying their tax? They're paying their fair share, which goes to schools and goes to hospitals and goes to roads. Yet you've got these big companies making $1 billion in this country plus paying zero. That's not a class warfare thing. It's just about paying your fair share. And there's quite a bit of revenue there, or tax revenue that might be collected if they pay their fair share, which will help with some of the other policies that we'll be putting out before the next election.
Okay, just moving on and just briefly here, Pete, it looks as though, well, this is according to the Australian Financial Review this morning, that Josh Frydenberg may well be open to a bit more support for business, and we may well be getting back to that $750 a week, which we saw at the start of JobKeeper, at the start of last year, I should say. I mean, you'd be supportive of that, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. I think the government really needs to bring JobKeeper back. We've been very critical of Morrison for the slow vaccine rollout. It's a bit more than that. It's the lack of timing or the way the government stuffed it up. JobKeeper was supposed to end as the vaccination rates were coming up. That was the whole kind of alignment that they messed up. And we've seen the result of that, not having a high enough vaccination rate. States still have to go down to lockdown with this Delta variant. So JobKeeper does have to come back in. There is a lot of small businesses, the arts, events, hospitality, that are suffering. Their reserves are really low. The connection with employer and employee is being broken again. We need to hold on to that for the future-proofing, fire-proofing of the economy as we go out of the pandemic, hopefully next year, with higher vaccination rates. So the government has a responsibility here. So fully supportive of them providing that support to businesses. Can I just add, Pete, very quickly, I'm a bit of an outlier on this. I've watched the state premiers, and this is not a Labor or Liberal thing, but all of them, and this kind of infighting that's going on and bickering and parochialism. I'm an outlier in this. We are all Australians. States should have been supporting New South Wales. New South Wales should have supported Victoria last year. Victoria, South Australia, Tasmania, Queensland should be supporting New South Wales. If they've got a little bit of vaccination, they should have given it up to New South Wales because they're in the most.
But they don't have a little bit. That's the problem.
Well, yeah, that is part of the problem. But we're in this together. So even if it was 5,000 vaccines here or 3,000 there, do everything we can. What I'm hearing or seeing is this perception of these kind of 8 little small states in the country. We are one nation, one country, Australia. We're all Australians. We have our, fun and our tension with New South Wales and Victorians and Queensland and all the rest of it with our sports and so on. but we should be supporting each other. Even the perception of it should be out there saying, yeah, we'll do our best to support you, even though it's a tiny little symbolic gesture. We should be doing it. What I'm seeing is the opposite. It's kind of this kind of hard-heartedness and this parochialism and this provincialism. I don't want to see that. I want to see resilience and Team Australia. I want to see that happening as we come out of the pandemic, because we need to be united as a nation going forward, particularly with our economic recovery next year as well.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes from fatigue as well. 18 months into this pandemic, people well and truly over it, to put it lightly. Peter Khalil, good to chat. Talk to you soon.